I love the character. He's everything that I wish I could be as a man. You know, he's good for the sake of good, and you know, that's a fun character to try and portray. And the creative forces behind the film are fantastic. The world around him is a different place. You know, he's from a different era, and I think that era really defines who he is. I think the modern day is a bit more flash and style, and a bit more selfish and a bit more impersonal. You know, there's a lot of technologies that put blocks in between people, and you know, the 40s, there was much more of a maybe a direct and honest sincerity to the way people behaved, and I think human interaction breeds manners, you know, and just you know, it's a way of life that I think Steve has just become accustomed to, and it's a different world that he has to get used to. It's so nice that as the Avengers are finding their niche within a group, so are we as people, and it's great. It's so far it's been a very healthy family. You know, it's almost too good to be true right now. I should knock on wood because things have gone so disgustingly well. It's almost, like I said, it's almost unbelievable. I hope it lasts, you know, because we get along so well. There's not, and I said this earlier, one bad apple could spoil the bunch. You know, you get one stick in the mud and it changes the dynamic. I think everybody in this cast is so fantastic. We get along so well. I think Cap, you know, feels a little bit of a kinship with the guy. They're both saddled with an immense amount of responsibility. They're both kind of fish out of water. You know, Banner had done a good job of hiding and doing his own thing, and then he's brought back to a place that he didn't choose to be. And he's adjusting to a foreign environment just like I am. So I think there are similarities to their characteristics, or to their situation at least. And I think for the most part, you know, I feel like Cap is kind of like a parent in a lot of ways. You know, I think he just looks out for people. Banner is obviously in a sensitive situation, so I think Cap is doing what he can to make him feel comfortable and adjusted. And Ruffalo, I can't say enough about Ruffalo. He's fantastic. He's one of those actors that's like he throws himself into it. Well, I think first it's his understanding of the comic book world. He's a fan first and foremost. He knows comic books, so it's not like there's never a question in my brain as to whether or not the fanboys will approve of what we're choosing to do. If all of a sudden I'm shooting a gun and you think, well, would Cap shoot a machine gun? If Joss said it's okay, it's okay. You know, because he is that demographic. And second, it's his passion. This is, like you said, it's a tricky task to bring all these characters together. It's a tall order. You couldn't do this movie if you didn't absolutely love this genre. You know, you couldn't have a director, talented as you want to find one, if he wasn't in love with this style of filmmaking, the comic book characters and crazy sets and superpowers and things like that. Joss, I think, just eats it up.
I agree that, you know, what made the original Iron Man, the origin story, work so well is that it was plausible. And then we had a bunch of fun doing the second one. And this time I feel like, again, speaking of alternate realities, you know, there's a way that that Tony can interact with the Avengers, because he's already had hints that this Nick Fury guy is clearly stringing him along. And so he's in the dark about it, so it shouldn't be that big a surprise. At the same time, I think it's kind of through Tony's eyes that you have to see and buy into some of these bigger ideas now, you know. I think he's curious, and it's hard for him to ingest what's going on, so he wants to go see it firsthand, but he's still himself. Probably in storytelling, you know, John Campbell mode, he's searching. With Rhodey, he realized he's not an island, and so there was a kind of a partnership, you know, outside of his with Pepper, and I think this time it's about that group mind and that, you know, we is better than I. He's a tough guy, and he has generalship, which is what this required, you know. You think of like Joe Johnston on Cap. It was like, you know, I bet that guy really said, look, we're mashing up genres and I'm going to really marshal this thing through. You think about Ken Branagh for Thor. There's no better person that Hemsworth could have had this kind of interaction and tutelage from. And for me, John was a natural fit. So again, I think, aside from casting, the thing that Marvel does best is they pick the right directors for their projects. And it's always an exciting announcement, but it also always has that extra thing of, oh, you know what? I wouldn't have necessarily thought that, but retrospectively, it makes perfect sense. I'd always felt that Mark was the guy to play Bruce Banner because there's something kind of immensely introspective and affable about the guy that makes that curse or that opportunity or that karma he has, which is not of his doing but his responsibility to manage some way. He's just kind of, and he's just a really kind of funny, quirky guy, but he's a straight shooter. And I think that's probably the most important thing, Well, it's no surprise to anyone who works with him just for a couple days that he is a profound technician. And so, honestly, I think you'd probably have to go back a generation from that and probably look at... He's got, some of the same operators and other people that work with... Spielberg or work with people of that genre, and even the Buffy series and his other films have always been visually really kind of their own thing. So, but I think what he's doing is he's drawing on everything he needs to draw on to make it his own.
Loki, who's Thor's brother, has come in from some other dimension, from somewhere, and he's gathering forces to invade there, and the only means I know of fighting them would be to bring together the Avengers. He's the guy who has the raison d'etre, that kind of understands the threat and has to get them to understand the nature of the threat, that we're a lot stronger together than they are individually. Well, Robert always brings a specific kind of energy that people know, love, and understand. It's interesting watching the integration of his energy with Captain America, his energy with Thor. He has a knowledge of Black Widow because she was in his organization for a while. He has an affection for her, actually. But he has a sense of autonomy that you kind of have to break through. That no matter what he's doing, it always seems like he's an island. And even though he's part of this team, he's an integral part of this team. You can't tell him that he's the most important or the strongest part of the team, because then he'll take it over. It's just in his nature. So I kind of have to rein him in and constantly remind him that his father and I had this relationship. Well, he brings a true understanding of what a comic book is and what comic book characters represent to the people who are going to watch the film. He's putting together a film that he would pay his money to go and see, and that I would pay my money to go and see. And that understanding is quite essential to this particular film, because there are so many different characters that have their own individual personalities. And he knows how to set up the conflicts between the characters, how to resolve them, and he knows how to make us all feel like a big unit when we start to work together. His dialogue is comic book driven. I don't work with a lot of people that that correct me a lot of times when I'm doing my lines and say, well, I wrote it this way, so try it that way and let me hear it, and da-da-da. So we do that more often than not. I remember how excited everybody was when we showed up on stage at Comic-Con. We were just standing there in our street clothes. And I do think that they want an exciting film. I do think they want a film that has some complexity. and I do think they want a conclusion that's extremely heroic and not just heroic, and hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Well, I think the first time that we saw this character, we didn't really know much about her. We never learned much about the widow. She's really, I think she's a slippery fish in Iron Man 2, and we get little glimpses of her, her true identity, but it all happens so quickly. To be able to play, the Black Widow as she is without, these many faces. I mean, she still has many different faces she puts on. I think she still is sort of divisive in that way, but we get to see a little bit more of who she is, a little bit of her history, of her kind of shady past. The Black Widow, when we first find her, is she's being tasked. She is in Russia. She is in the middle of taking care of business, and she is then sent for by Nick Fury, and I think all of these characters are sort of reluctant superheroes in a sense. She looks at it as just kind of another job. She's basically out there kind of recruiting the team. And she doesn't know much about this world. We definitely embrace the wushu a lot, and there's a lot of weapons in this, way more, kind of weaponry than I've ever had to learn before. So that's been complicated a little bit. You're like, okay, I can do all this hand-to-hand stuff. Oh yeah, here's this giant staff, or, a bow and arrow, or fight with these two guns in your hand. And you're like, wait a minute, I had all those movements down, and now I'm fighting against, a 20-pound, giant stick. So that stuff is a little bit difficult to pick up. I have to say, the first time I saw what they had in mind, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to learn it. And you do, it's just a lot of fails until you get it. Joss's dialogue is so witty and so dry and so clever, and I think he's really invested in each personality, and you can see the little I'd call them Whedonisms in the words. There's a lot of pop cultural references, and there's a lot of heart behind the characters. They are, when they hurt, they're hurt. We relate to them. There's betrayal. There's suspicion. These are real feelings, and I think the audience will relate to them just as they have in the Iron Man films, just as they have in Thor, just as they do, in Captain America. I think the audience relates to each one of these films because they are, and I think it's why audiences, or why readers relate to comic books, is because these characters are human but have these superhuman abilities. And Joss, as a fan, I think, was just dedicated to seeing that through. I think what makes this film stand out is, of course, the cast is just insane. When do you ever get to see this group of actors come together in this kind of fantasy world? And I think it's the sort of the grounded nature with which this film, with which Joss has infused this film, that sort of is, I think, in my mind, a throwback to what people loved in Iron Man, the original, but it's with a kind of sci-fi infusion in some way. It's everything that Joss loves about sci-fi, which is being able to escape in this sort of, ultimate kind of otherworldly reality, but have it still be heartfelt and sincere.